live in a world where most of our perception is formed by social media platforms. Why? Because most of the people have seen the growth of social media and the penetration in our in today's society has been that to that extent where most of the people their perception is sharp there, and most of the content they get it from the social media. Nowadays you don't have actually the average person, the content that it absorbs more and it buys more is the content that it gets from social media, and not necessarily goes and fact checks that information, but it rather just it has firstly it has a reaction to it, maybe it emotional or directly absorb the information, but not necessarily go and reason with that information and maybe just give it another try. Maybe this information is not reasonable, maybe this information is not true. So when we have most of the people, most of the average people having a response to the content that they absorb in the social media platforms, we find it important and extremely important as government to take actions and to hold liable those social media platforms for the illegal content and for the content that's produced there. And I will tell you the reasons why. But before we go there, if you have an API, please raise your hand by opening your camera. So before that, let me give you a bit of modeling. So we want this when there is evidence that social media, aware of this fake news, which in most of the cases they know, they'll be subjected to fines, or they'll be subjected to fines and to legal actions. Because why we want this? Because we want to have a much more safe content, and the content that's not dangerous. And why it's particularly dangerous when it comes to social media. I'm sure you are all aware of what happened with Cambridge Analytica and how it functioned in many countries, and how it actually made this illegal content, this fake news and defamation they used it to target different kind of audiences, the audiences that particularly more appealing to that kind of information, and particularly will have a more reaction to it. So what's this, and how is this working? So each and every social media has some algorithm that they have created, where they input the data they get from us, and then they show us the information that we want to hear. They show us the news that we want to hear, and what kind of information we are most likely to observe. And don't tell me, the opposition cannot come today and tell us that in any case once they've searched, for example, they've searched coffee, and then they didn't have tens of different ads related to the coffee. This is just an example to illustrate what I'm trying to say. So this is extremely important, because this can be used by different parties to create unrest in the society, and that's one of the reasons why we want to hold them liable. How they can create unrest in the society? Think of some conservative people who significantly hate gay people, so they don't want gay people in the society. They don't want them to be anymore. Are extremely homophobic. So these people who are homophobic now can use those illegal news and illegal information to actually to target audiences such as conservative, and to portray different kind of fake news or different defamation on the gay community, not actually trying to change their perception on the gay people and on the LGBT people, but actually appeal to their conservative emotions, actually appeal to that extent, to the point where those people started actually hating more LGBT community, started actually being more homophobic, and so on and so forth. This is also very crucial when we have, for example, the governments, different kind of parties are also able, if we don't hold them accountable, they are also able to target such information and fake news. Say, for example, on elections day, if we don't hold them liable, and they can generate any content that they want in social media, who's to stop them that they will tell black voters that the election day is on another day, not on the day that it particularly is in the case of the United States. So social media is the most. So this platforms is also the most effective way that we can hold accountable different politicians, and with how this can be done. Because in the case when they can generate any kind of fake news or any kind of content that they want in social media, those politicians are not likely going to be held accountable by the society, because the main way we hold them accountable is through the vote. Like if we saw a politician who didn't make any kind of progress, then in the next voting we will know that this politician we shouldn't vote this politician because he didn't actually provide any development in the society. But when you have this ability to generate content, when those politicians actually have made progress in the society, they just say that they made progress in the society, and they generate this information to the average voters, which is the majority of voters, then those people are more likely, because of this fake content, because of not realistic content, they can go in the voters' day, and actually we end up not holding politicians accountable. Politicians can also do a different kind of acts and cover behind or hide behind the ability that social media gives them, particularly not to be held accountable by the average voters due to the content that they release in social media. This will also is important because thirdly, it will give rise to populism and populistic leaders. So what happens when the social media, when in the social platforms, different kind of leaders have the ability to just appeal to the emotions of any people that they want. We've seen in the case of Erdogan where he has a lot of media just giving rise to his populist and autocratic regime, just keeping praising his whatever actions he does, when in contrary it's the opposite, and the country is just going for worse. You have the case of Turkey where there is significant economic fragility, and the government media and the media affiliated to the government just keeps bringing content in the social media through different cells and different accounts, just giving information there how the economy is flourishing, just to keep Erdogan in power there. But when in fact the inflation rate is considered to be 25% more than it actually is portrayed in the social media. So, and also in the long run, they will have the power to grow more and be more powerful, give them more lobbying power, and so on and so forth, which Chris will tell you in a little bit. So because I've shown you how this can be significantly to cause unrest in the society, especially it can be harmful towards minorities. I've shown you how this will also disable us from keeping politicians accountable, and how this will most likely going to give rise of populistic leaders, and how in the long run they will have greater power. For those reasons, I've been never prouder to propose. Thank you very much.
Great. I thank that speaker for those remarks. Just a reminder that I stopped writing after 7 minutes and 15 seconds. And with that reminder, I now call upon the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Fantastic. The full point of information, may I have them in the chat? If I am not noticing points, if you think you can open up your camera and raise your hand. It's more visual for me, but regardless, it should work well. Fantastic. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. We think there needs to be a massive clarification within this debate, because a lot of what government brought as harms was specifically targeted advertising. Note that targeted advertising didn't just exist on social media; it was throughout the entire internet. So by simply removing any targeted advertising that was fake on social media didn't actually fix the problem, because you still had it everywhere else on the internet. Note, the reason why we preferred targeted advertising on social media compared to other places was the fact that we were able to comment on that, the fact that we were able to call it out, the fact that we had visibility to be able to say, no, these claims are lies, they're false, they are just completely untrue. Before I get into 2 points of substantive, I'm just going to recontextualize the debate and a bit of extraneous rebuttal. So first off, I think we need a comparative for what people actually do when you have these when you simply remove this information, because government didn't really bring us any comparative of what actually they thought people were going to do. So what do we think happens? We think at the point where you remove things that are considered fake news and all of that, you're going to necessarily send people with those views to other forums. That is to say that you send them to web forums. That is to say that you send them to particular particularly bipartisan news. What happens here necessarily is that they get caught up in an echo chamber that is completely isolated from the rest of the world. Note, the fantastic thing about social media was that you had like this like exchange of ideas, this marketplace of ideas where someone could call you out for lying. Note that is impossible at the point where you are like part of a like very like a bipartisan news channel, let's say like Fox News, for instance, where like they are simply just going to like outright like lie anyway, and they don't have any problem with that. But secondly, beyond that, we gave them a legitimate claim within this to say that their views were not being heard, because at the very fact, like, yes, it was like, you know, untrue within a lot of regards that, you know, that, you know, like they may be lying about, you know, immigrants stealing jobs, but necessarily that represented the fact that some people were worried about their employment. And the fact is, when you like remove that speech, what they view is they view that as a censorship, saying that that view is not important to them. We always thought that just simply meant that like people were more likely to get riled up and to get angry and to fight back and to actually like act out against like this perceived censorship against them. We thought legitimizing like these like we thought like legitimizing this hate by creating like a very us and them mentality instead of a like open marketplace of ideas was always going to be harmful. That wasn't something that like opposition that government like really like dealt with there. Okay, I'm going to get into 2 points of substantive, but firstly, generally how we think the clash operates within this debate. Firstly, is there actually like a moral responsibility for these social media platforms to handle what is posted? And secondly, like what are the unexpected consequences necessarily of this that we are going to bring you? Firstly, on like whether or not there is actually like a moral responsibility, 3 points within this. So first off, like in this point, note that this is like independent. So let's like completely like accept that in a majority of cases, this is necessarily like hate speech and like awful, and there's like nothing else going on. Why do we simply just win the debate of like it's not the job for Facebook and for Instagram to do this? Firstly, we think it is structurally impossible for them to regulate these ideas. That is to say that they cannot police the thoughts and sentiments of someone like within their user base, because it is difficult to understand the like diverse lexicon of internet language. That is to say that they like do not like that it is like incredibly difficult to understand what someone is actually trying to portray there. Secondly, within this, we would note that like as we mentioned before, like even if these things are necessarily hate speech, there often are like legitimate grievances behind that. And the fact is, if that is the only way for someone to express that like expression still necessarily has value within that. That is to say that like I feel like immigrants are stealing my jobs is still a legitimate expression of having like feeling like your job is going to be taken, even if it is based upon a falsehood. Secondly, like even if it was possible to do so, we think that social media necessarily has to be net neutral. That is to say that, and I'll take closing government in about 30 seconds. So we think that like necessarily it is the purpose of social media to be net neutral. That like if we look at like various things, that like fake news definition laws like change drastically between countries, and consequently we thought that like it was like pretty much impossible for like often to be able to like regulate this effectively, because at the point where you're having to go through so many different accounts, we thought it was necessarily impossible. And the like harm of this is that you're necessarily going to create a chilling effect. I'll take closing government now on the POI.
Do you support the fact that like spaces like eBay have to make it banned to sell drugs on their platforms?
Yes, because that is like necessarily like an outright transaction which eBay like benefits from. Note, eBay actually like receives a substantial receives like part of each purchase, and we think like that is like specifically enabling something illegal there. Note within this that we like the government doesn't go out and go out into like a group of people who are protesting at a Trump rally and shut down the rally because like there's hate speech within it. Note the comparison is that speech is necessarily more protected than other actions which have tangible harms. Finally, into this principle, here we go. Even if they were capable of doing it, we think it's not we think that the fact that they're not democratically elected means they do not have the mandate necessarily to restrict the speech of people. That is to say that they must do it upon arbitrary metrics of what they think, and those arbitrary metrics are always going to be based on a chilling effect where they simply do not want to get sued at all, so you're going to limit as much free speech as possible. We necessarily see this as a harm. Okay, second point of substantive here. One, well, there are unseen consequences, three unseen consequences here. Firstly, we see that there's like massive illegal content differs between countries. We think this like enables countries to be very abusive within that. We think that is like necessarily within like Myanmar. That is to say like things like regarding like Rohingya Muslims. That is to say that they would like not necessarily define that as hate speech, and as such like these like social media companies wouldn't necessarily have to ban that if like someone was being like aggressive towards them. Secondly, Secondly, we think that like it's like these laws aren't even necessarily fair. That is to say that like secondly, we think it necessarily pushes you towards echo chambers. Those echo chambers always are just going to like get people more riled up, make them more aggressive, and simply perpetuate these views without any capacity to challenge them. So proud to oppose.
Great. I thank that speaker for those remarks. And now to continue the case for side government, called the DPM. Here.
Anyway, the lighting in my room is bad, so for live streaming, like, I'm sorry, guys, you're just gonna see the shadow. Anyway, let me set my timer. Wait. Look, okay. Wait. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, anyway, in this debate, I'm going to give the analysis. I'm going to mechanize my argument. I'm going to show what they are pro to anything else that will be said in this debate. And then I'm going to show you how they have to win this debate. Cool. So I'm going to begin with some clarification, right? Because it came and he said, like, when we're talking about, for example, like immigrants are stealing jobs, like this is not something we would all define as fake news. I think like this is not the kind of things that we're talking about in this debate. Like when you're talking about the immigrants, the effect of immigrants on jobs, these are debates which are happening in academia. There are many studies which are happening in kind of this field, right? Like these are things that people can debate, which do not fall in the category of fake news. What we're talking about here, what we're talking about as fake news, and which we believe the social media already know that it's fake news. For example, if you say, for example, like Muslims are destroying Europe, right? When you say, for example, Alexander Cortez said that we have to eat our children so that we can save the environment. When you say, for example, that gays are destroying the Middle East, these are things which are objectively fake news, which are defamatory, and which the social media's companies know. We're not talking about those things which actually are happening and like people are debating even in the academic life. So we think that already, given the characterization of fake news, everybody knows this, but why don't the social media take them down under the status quo? It's not because there is difficulty in terms of defining what is fake news. It's because they have the structural incentive to actually keep fake news there. What do I mean? Like, we are all human beings, and I think we are all attracted to sensational news, i.e. we are more likely to engage when we have the kind of news that makes emotion run high, right? So for example, when you come and you put a news there that feminists are killing the world, right? Like I feel like as feminists, they feel an engagement they feel a need to come and defend themselves. Like even people who have that kind of movement, they feel a need to come and engage, and there is a fight which is going there on. So literally there is an incentive to kind of let news which make emotions run high, which create unrest, which create panic, which make more clicks and engagement with their basically all the kind of scandalized news. They have an incentive to keep them there, because when there is more engagement, like these social medias are going to be getting more money, generate more money. Have you ever asked yourself why every time the scandalized news are the one which get more likes, more retweets, and more engagement on social media? It's literally because all of us, we want to go there and participate in that conversation, which is kind of destructive in a way, to the point where we actually make social medias liable to fake news and defamatories. We are able to reshift their incentive of keeping the fake news there, because now they know that they have to pay a big fine when they let those kind of things know, right? So it's not a problem of definition, knowing what is the fake news, but it's a problem of shifting the incentive from letting them profit from that kind of engagement which comes from bad things, to actually making them accountable and to put fines there. By shifting those incentives, then we make them stop the bad news. Okay, cool. So let me get into the problems that actually come within this news, because he came and he gives some arguments how like when we restrict this, like people are going to go on web channels and everything. First, I think this is already symmetrical. Why? Because like web channels, even on the status quo, they already exist people using the web channels. But the second thing is that the reason why like people are preferring to use social media over web channels is because like the web channels can never get a kind of engagement which you get on the social media. Understand that if I tweet something on Twitter or put something on Facebook, Facebook, many people are going to be able to access it. I literally cannot know all the web channels on which people are talking all the kind of negative things. It's literally impossible. But on social media, it's possible that my tweet or my post on Facebook can be recirculated over and over again in a kind of engagement which can never get on the web channel. So even if people go to web channels, they cannot get the kind of platform that is able to get on social media. But second, understand that he talks about how these web channels are equals like bubbles. Understand that in the same way, actually, social media is a big bubble. What does this mean? If let's say I'm left wing, like social media use algorithms, they are going to look at the things which I like to engage with. If it's left wing policies, they're going to give me the kind of content which is left wing. If I'm a right wing, they're going to give me the kind of content which is right wing. Literally take the social media of either one person who is left wing or right wing, you are going to see that the kind of content that they have is radically different. This is the way in which it's bubble, and it creates like many problems. Okay, cool. Anyway, so let me go actually into the way the work and this bubbleness actually exacerbate like social problems. For example, I'm going to show how they create like more hate toward minorities using the example of Islamophobia. For example, given in Europe, like after the Notre Dame was burning, like social medias, like people on Facebook, they went on Facebook to show how Muslims were celebrating the burning of Notre Dame. This was fake news literally, but no, it wasn't put down. They say how Muslims are creating like kind of organization to kind of destroy the European culture. They are creating a plural community. This is something that factually anyone could know that it was wrong, but because Facebook was benefiting from the engagement, it didn't put this down. This created Islamophobia. This contributed to the increase of Islamophobia in Europe. It is the same within all kinds of minorities, to the point that I already live in that bubble of the social media, and I'm given this kind of content every time, every day. Even if at some point I may doubt it, when I'm given this thing over and over again, I come to see it as the truth. But second, I show you that this is very detrimental to democracy. Understand that for democracy to function, we need access to truth and facts, right? I need to have the truth and facts and be able to judge accordingly. When we have groups of people which are targeted and which are exposed to negative news, already I do not have the truth and the fact. Already the decision which I was going to make is going to be inspired or informed by unreal information, and then my choice is going to be inherently misled. We tell that to the point where we have people living in the bubbles and people exposed to negative information, then democracy in itself is in danger, right? We also tell you that there is more polarization which happens. Already understand that. Okay, POI, real quick. Yeah.
Okay, do you not like ruin democracy at the point where any like political opinion who comes close to one of these illegal speeches will always be censored at the point that the like social media company never wants to risk a legal case? Or, like,
yeah, cool. Okay, let me answer that. Like basically we said that in our model, we acknowledge that there are kind of debates which can happen, right? You can talk about, for example, we can legitimately talk about like Islamic radicalism, and we can have a debate about that. But when you come and you say things which are factually wrong, we have to take that down, right? We can acknowledge that there are some problems within the left-wing movement. We can debate that. But when you factually say something which is wrong, we have to take that down. Our case that we are making is that to the point where it's factual that this is wrong. Given that social media are not taking that down for increasing engagement, at this point, we have to take that thing down so that we actually stop all the harm that we are telling you. We are not talking about legitimate debates which can happen. We are talking about saying like things like Holocaust did not happen, right? It's only recently that we started to ban that. We have to extend that beyond Holocaust and put it on all kinds of negative things which can literally happen so that we stop polarization within the community, so that we create a better pace, because social media is so hugely important nowadays and it's the biggest medium of news consumption. I rest my case.
Great. I thank that speaker for those remarks, and now call the DLO. Hear, hear.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yep, very well.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Honorable panel, even if a government's harms about fake news, targeted advertising, and defamation are true, they fail to answer the fundamental question of this debate. why should we hold social media, the platforms such as Facebook and Twitter in particular, directly liable for crimes of free speech of other specific individuals, like bigoted politicians who we can sue directly, who have intent, malpractice, and have direct effects from their free speech? Why should we hold a third party liable for their specific crimes? The problem with their side, coming from our side, is that what you do when you hold free speech or when you hold social media platforms liable is that you incentivize them to be the preemptory regulatory body of social media. Why is that dangerous? Because now that they are afraid of getting sued, people like Facebook and Twitter will be forced to determine what should they censor and what they should not censor, when they themselves cannot determine what is truly fact, what is truly a valid opinion, or what is truly not hate speech. That's a dangerous responsibility you're putting into private corporations, and we think that's prone to abuse. We win for three simple reasons. One, we showed you why there's no moral or legal obligation of social media, and that placing this obligation is prone to dangerous abuse because you incentivize them to be a preemptory regulatory body to decide which is fact and which is not, which was mentioned in LO and not fully responded directly. But secondly, we said that this is abusable because free speech laws differ by country. My understanding of free speech in Southeast Asia is different from the understanding of defamation in the US, where people are more sensitive about it. But lastly, I will argue in my extension is that if you uphold this policy, Facebook and Twitter will continue to refuse to cooperate with government people to target things like bigots and hate speech because they do not want to be sued anymore. So you ruin all the harms or the benefits on your side. Before I move on to my extension, 3 points for rebuttal. Firstly, Deputy Prime Minister argued that in social media, they have a negative incentive to keep up sensationalized news, and that's why we have to hold them liable. Firstly, so what? Sensationalized news doesn't directly mean fake news, doesn't directly mean defamation. It can just be exaggerating on certain aspects or talking about the personal things of certain individuals. That is not necessarily an invalid opinion. But secondly, even if it is true that all sensationalized news, all exciting news is hate speech, we think that it is harmful because now social media has to determine before the law, before any other regulatory body, to censor that beforehand. When in cases they could be wrong, that's when it's a legal opportunity. But lastly, we spun that coming from LO. We have an opportunity to take that down on our side with the mandate of the government if we wait for them to determine the specific actor that we have to sue and the specific harms to that extent. That doesn't exist on your side because Facebook and Twitter are incentivized to do it before any other cooperation. No, thank you. Second point of rebuttal. They said that the coming from DPM and shared from PM is that there's a misuse of metadata, like targeted advertising is bad because if I am conservative, they will only give me right-wing content. Firstly, so what? If I'm conservative, I'll probably only join Facebook groups that are conservative, like Men for Trump or whatever, or even the Proud Boys group in the very first place. So we think that that kind of use of metadata doesn't matter. What this debate is about is whether or not we can force Facebook and Twitter to uphold the responsibility to determine what extent is it okay to be right-wing on social media. And that's harmful because if they're as evil as you say, corporate interests will make it so less likely for them to be a good regulatory body. Lastly, they said coming from Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister is that there will be more hate towards minorities because Facebook and Twitter refuse to put down like hate towards Muslims or hate towards the Rohingya in Myanmar in the very first place. One, that's factually false. We think Facebook and Twitter are making attempts for community individuals to report other things and participate in the regulatory body. That's why there are new features now on Facebook to say, if you see fake news, please report it to us and we will operate and we will direct it to the US government or whatever. But secondly, we think that this debate is about the gray areas. What if we're unsure about hate speech? What if we're unsure about fake news? Should social media have the preemptive moral obligation to determine what to do that because they're afraid of being sued by the government? We think that was not answered in their side. But fine, even if it is true, even if Facebook is so evil and wants to keep up hate speech because it gets a lot of dollars from it, we don't think a fine will disincentivize them because they'll still get more dollars coming from that kind of attention rather than any kind of arbitrary fine that the government imposes. We don't think that's good on their side. Before I move on, yes, closing.
Right. Do you ultimately believe that because companies are afraid, as you mentioned, of legal operation or like anything legal applied to them, don't you think that they'll be really careful about managing the gray areas, such as what they did in Germany?
Yes, they'll be really careful about managing the gray areas, but they will always err on the side of caution and just censor it anyway. Because if it's already posted on their platform, they can already be held liable for it. We think that when they silence people, there is no way for them to be fined by those people or individuals anyway. So we think that it's worse on your side. Let's go to my extension. Where do we more effectively regulate dangerous content? We think that the alternative on our side is simple. You directly sue bigoted politicians. You directly sue InfoWars. Why is that better? Two reasons. One, it's agent specific, so it's direct accountability. You go through the direct measures and allow Facebook to cooperate, giving them the data or the different posts. We think Facebook is less likely to cooperate if they're going to be fined for it anyway. But secondly, we think the problem is that fake news evolves and indigenizes depending on the community. For example, in Myanmar, it was difficult for Facebook to keep track of the hate speech towards the Rohingya because they used a lot of internet or colloquial slang that their individuals cannot keep up with. What you do on our side is when you sue these people directly and not through Facebook, you incentivize cooperation and collaboration. So let's move to my second issue. Where do we better increase trust and inclusivity in social media and free speech laws? We think that people use social media and the government entrust social media with this responsibility because people proactively and willingly participate on Facebook and Twitter because they believe it is a field of neutrality. The problem on their side is that preemptive regulation invalidates this because you cannot trust corporate bodies to determine what is factual and what is not factual. But more importantly, we think things about populism or the very vague notions don't immediately constitute hate speech or defamation. So what's the problem on their side? Two things. One, you directly distort cooperation. We think Facebook has already showed interest in collaborating with the US government, keeping up new features and everything else. But more importantly, create a chilling effect. We think what you do is that you make them preemptively and rashly censor things. But secondly, even if they don't do that, what they're more likely going to do is cover up or skirt their responsibility. They'll more or less likely to be showing things like what was hate speech, but rather spending their resources on PR, spending their resources on blockading or creating obstacles towards government or Senate investigations, or spending their resources on things like legal defenses, rather than using it on things like, for example, targeting or having more language barriers or more language understanding for specific regions where hate speech is prevalent. So the harms are worse on your side because Facebook and Twitter are incentivized to preserve themselves rather than their communities. Why is this bad? We think in conclusion, this incapacitates free discussion, pushes people to echo chambers, and distorts the kind of cooperation that already exists between social media platforms because for the very simple reason that they are not responsible for the hatred that was thrown by InfoWars, hatred thrown against our politicians. The motion falls. Thank you.
Great. I thank that speaker for those remarks. This concludes the top half of this debate. I now call upon the member of government to open up the back half. Hear, hear.